you mentioned that you drove from Oregon down to Panama or
Right.
down to Central America.
Yes.
What is that drive like?
It's interesting. So that was, I think, probably 4 years after I had moved here, and I had an old Subaru Outback up there that was just sitting there, and I was just like, it's a good car, it's really reliable. I think I'll drive it down. So I packed it up with everything and literally the kitchen sink that's in my house.
Yeah.
And packed it full. And I have a really good friend who came with me. And so I picked him up in Utah, and we left, and he has an 8-foot longboard, mini longboard. And so, I mean, I'll get into what the rest of it was like, but I mean, the initial crossing of the border in Brownsville, Texas into Mexico was interesting because here we are, a couple of, Americans with an 8-foot longboard on the top of the car and no surf to be found.
Yeah.
And
they're like, is this a decoy? Like, are they smuggling something? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And within the first probably 40 minutes, we were pulled over, I think 5 or 6 times. And it was
40 minutes of crossing into Mexico.
Like within the first probably 2 minutes, boom, we were pulled over, and then maybe like 4 or 5 times after that, within 40 minutes. And it was all just like we stuck out like a sore thumb. So at that point, the realization came that we couldn't drive through Mexico with a surfboard on top of the car. Yeah. And so we stuffed it in between us. And so literally we did the whole rest of the drive through Central America with a longboard in between us.
Damn.
So that was interesting. But the drive was pretty uneventful. And in hindsight, looking back, I realized that it was probably a little bit more dangerous than I thought. But I think I just wanted to not think about that aspect. I think my parents knew, especially my dad. He was like trying to get me to bring a handgun and like put it under the seat of the car for protection. He's just that way. And I was like, man, that's going to cause more problems because I know every border check, I'm going to be sweating. Are they going to find this thing?
Yeah.
But during that time when we crossed the border right there in Matamoros, Mexico, and Brownsville, there had been tourists that had been pulled out of their vehicle and shot on the side of the road. And I didn't really know that until after the fact. So
was it like a fake cop situation, or they just stopped somewhere and got pulled out?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because I've heard the fake cop thing a bunch in Mexico.
Well, and that's interesting too, because I definitely ran into situations where I'm like, are you a cop or not?
Yeah.
And one time we were pulling into I think it was Veracruz, and the highway opened it up, and there were like 4 lanes. And so we're driving along, and there were a bunch of cars on the road, and there were 2 cops standing just in between the lanes. And they were just pointing at cars saying, you pull over. And I don't know why. I mean, I don't know what their criteria for pulling somebody over was, but
I guess you don't need it in Mexico.
Of course, I was one of them.
Yeah.
And it kind of leads into a funny story because he comes up to the window and he's talking to me, and it was the same story every time. My window tint was too dark, and I got my windows tinted just for the trip because I didn't want people seeing in. Plus, it's hot.
Yeah.
And so he, told me he's going to give me a fine. I had to go to the police station and all these things. And so at that point, I'd been through this so many times through Mexico. I was just like, all right, I know the deal. So I got out and went back behind the car, and I was just like, okay, how much do you want? Yeah. And I look up at him, and I took a good look at him, and he had his official looking uniform on, but he had this baseball cap on that was like bedazzled. And I think it said like love or something.
Like, I don't think that's cop issued uniform.
It was bedazzled.
It just says MPD on it and bedazzled.
Yeah. I think it said love or something. It was like wear your daughter's hat to work day or something.
Yeah, exactly.
It was hard for me to take him seriously, And I was like, well, how much is it? And he's like, no, don't pull out your money. People are going to see. And I was like, oh, okay. So I kind of did it, a little bit hidden, and gave him the money. And I said, okay, but how am I supposed to, now that I've paid you my fine for tinted windows, how do I know that your friend down the road 3 miles isn't going to pull me over and do the same thing? And he said, oh yeah, I'm going to give you a password. And I was just like, okay, a password. And he's like, hold out your hand. And I held out my hand, and he wrote Tortuga on it, which means turtle.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that seems pretty official. And
yeah.
and he's like, oh, I'm going to radio them too and let them know. And so he had a mic on his chest. And he grabs the mic, and I can clearly see that he didn't key the mic at all.
Yeah, like
I'm standing in front of him.
It's like a 5-year-old like Toys R Us mic.
It was also pink.
It says something like "play with me," like when you press it.
Exactly. So he pretends to key the mic and he gives a description of the car and all that. And I was just, all right, thanks, man. And I got in the car and I was and my friend was like, what happened? And I was laughing so hard.
Yeah.
Because it was so comical. So yeah, the fake cop thing, I still don't know if he was real. I think he was real, but just maybe unprofessional.